welcome to Just Between Us with me, Jennifer Zamparelli, sponsored by Kildare Village. Oh, yeah. Now, this podcast is mostly about fun indoors, but if you fancy a bit of al fresco, why not get out of the house and take a visit to Kildare Village with over 100 boutiques, 60 of which are exclusive in Ireland and 20 new brands to choose from. Visit Kildare Village, shopping that's so Irish.
It's a lot easier for boys to discover the pleasure of masturbation than it is for girls.
Do you think society has a perception of what men want from porn?
Oh my God, this is what the world needs.
Today we are talking about pleasure, yes, specifically masturbation, porn, and the complicated relationship many people have with both. We live in a world where porn is everywhere. Masturbation is being talked about more now, and yet so many people still feel confused, ashamed, or quietly worried about what any of it means for their health, their relationships, or their sense of self. So I'm joined by Cindy Gallop, who's here to help us untangle what masturbation actually offers us, what porn has become in the absence of proper sex education, and how we can build a healthier, more honest relationship with pleasure. This episode is about understanding desire, consent, confidence, and what healthy pleasure looks like in real life. Cindy, you're very welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great, and I'm so happy to be here and having this conversation with you.
I know you were in Ireland before, and you've talked about such things before in Ireland. Can I just ask you, before we get into masturbation, all that kind of stuff, do you remember the response, the Irish public's response? Was it quite guarded? Was it welcomed with open arms? Do you remember a sense of what it felt like?
No, absolutely, because, I've spoken about Make Love Not Porn in Ireland on a number of occasions. I've done a number of, interviews, and I can tell you that the Irish public responds in the same way the public does in every other country in the world, which is with enormous relief, gratitude, and appreciation. Because a very important part of what we do at my company, Make Love Not Porn, is it's not simply about, what we bring to the table, it's about how we're doing it. And we are all about taking the shame, guilt, and embarrassment out of sex. And I can tell you that Irish people welcome anybody and anything that is normalizing and destigmatizing such an important part of life for all of us.
I love it. I love it so much, and we need it. Let's get right into it and talk about masturbation. What is it that most people don't understand about this joyous act?
Well, first of all, there is absolutely a gender divide here, because it's a lot easier for boys to discover the pleasure of masturbation than it is for girls. And there are a couple of reasons for that. There is a very obvious anatomical one, because it's a lot easier for boys to understand their anatomy in terms of how they respond to pleasurable signals and what they can do about it. But unfortunately, masturbation is far more stigmatized when it comes to girls and women than it is for boys and men. And that is something that I and Make Love Not Porn are very keen to eradicate, because masturbation is a wonderful thing and everybody should be doing it as much as they want to.
Okay, tell me why. Tell me why, as if I'm not a fan of masturbation already. Tell me why it is so beneficial.
Yeah. Well, first of all, at a very basic level, it's the most enjoyable free entertainment you can have. Many years ago, the playwright Christopher Hampton wrote a play called The Philanthropist, in which he wrote the line, "Masturbation is the thinking man's television." Now, obviously, that's back in the day when television was a lot more prominent than it is today. And also that line should have read, "Masturbation is the thinking man's and woman's television." But basically, it's free entertainment. So, easily accessible, hugely enjoyable, but also, very importantly, masturbation is how you get to know your own body and what gives you pleasure. And so it is a wonderful form of solo self exploration. And, one of the very interesting things about what we do at Make Love Not Porn, which is a user generated social sex video sharing platform, is we have a lot of people who are sharing solo masturbation videos. And these wonderful, we call our contributors, our creators, Make Love Not Porn stars, because they are sharing how they all make love in the real world, whether with partners or to themselves. But a lot of people have never ever seen anybody else masturbate. And it is enormously educational to do so, because I remember one man saying to us, after visiting Make Love Not Porn, I suddenly realized I could be having so much more fun masturbating. Everyone should feel free to really explore different ways of masturbating, using different sex toys, all of which, our real world sex videos demonstrate and Make Love Not Porn, because it's a great way to get to know what gives you pleasure, so that when you actually make love with a partner, you can help them understand how to give you the best time possible.
You talk a lot about sexual values. Can you describe that to our listeners and what that is?
Sure. So, I designed. First of all, I believe that everything in life starts with you and your values. And I designed Make Love Not Porn around my own beliefs and philosophies. And that's a very, very fundamental belief of mine. And so I regularly ask people this question: what are your sexual values? And nobody can ever answer me, because we're not taught to think like that. Our parents bring us up to have good manners, a work ethic, sense of responsibility, accountability. Nobody ever brings us up to behave well in bed, but they should, because in bed, values like empathy, sensitivity, generosity, kindness, honesty, trust, respect are as important as those values are in every other area of our lives where we are actively taught to exercise them. And so one of the reasons I created Make Love Not Porn was as what I call sex education through real world demonstration. Because I'm a great believer in communication through demonstration. Don't say it, be it, do it, show it. That's how you get people to understand it. And so every video on Make Love Not Porn is good sexual values and good sexual behavior being demonstrated, so people can learn how to behave well in bed.
Thank God. How do you feel about mainstream porn?
So here's the issue. What I've been saying for 17 years, ever since I launched Make Love Not Porn at TED in 2009, is the issue isn't porn. The issue is that we do not talk openly and honestly about sex in the real world. Because if we did, people would then be able to bring a real world mindset to the viewing of what is simply performative, produced, scripted entertainment. And so the focus really needs to be not on porn, but on what are we doing in society and what are we doing educationally. Now, it is important, though, to couple that with an understanding that, like honestly, pretty much every industry, the porn industry as it currently exists is male dominated. And by the way, one of the reasons for that, and again, people are often not aware of this, is that a gigantic monopoly exists in the adult industry that would not be allowed to exist anywhere else, but nobody wants to bring antitrust legislation to porn. A company that used to be called MindGeek and some years ago rebranded itself to ALO, owns pretty much everything. ALO owns Pornhub, YouPorn, RedTube, Brazzers, almost every tube site you can think of. And when one company has that bigger monopoly, what children and young people and everybody are accessing is um, a vast amount of porn that is through the male lens and is through a very particular male lens driven by a company that's decided it knows what people want. So there is a massive imbalance also in the world of porn, because I have friends who are brilliant female, queer, feminist pornographers. They are creating very different types of porn, consensual, pleasurable. Nobody can find their work because of ALO's monopolistic, domination of the industry. So this is obviously a very huge and nuanced area we're discussing, but I really want, for the benefit of our listeners, to go back to my first point, which is, the issue isn't porn. The issue is that we must talk openly and honestly about sex in the real world so that everyone understands that what you see in porn is not how you should be having sex and making love in the real world.
And going back to what you said earlier, discussing our sexual values and what's important, and talking about consent and empathy and kindness, and all that is part of a sexual experience. I would say as well. If someone is listening to this podcast and they're feeling completely disconnected from their body, from pleasure, where is a gentle place to rebuild that? Where would they start, would you say?
So, obviously I'm biased, but I'm saying this because this is exactly why I built my platform. I recommend they go to makelovenotporn.com and they watch our wonderful Make Love Not Porn stars um, enjoying themselves, both solo, loving themselves, and loving their partners. Because the way to think about us is, if porn is the Hollywood blockbuster movie, as I said, scripted, performative, produced, extreme, Make Love Not Porn is the badly needed documentary. We are a unique window onto the funny, messy, loving, wonderful sex we all have in the real world. And so the moment you go on Make Love Not Porn, people tell me this, they breathe a sigh of relief. They're not quite sure what they're going to find. It's gentle, it's loving, it's wonderful. And then what you see is people like you, and we have a huge spectrum of Make Love Not Porn stars. We have older women discovering how to pleasure themselves for the first time. We have young people madly in love who are having a wonderful time and sharing that with us. I always say that Make Love Not Porn is love in action. But very importantly, everything about our platform is designed to take the shame, guilt, and embarrassment out of all of this. One of the words we hear back from members all the time is guilt free, and also to really educate people on how wonderful it can be to enjoy yourself, to take pleasure in your body, to take pleasure in sexual partners, completely free of guilt, and in a way that is joyous, celebratory, and life affirming. But what you stumble across, what you get turned on by, and what you masturbate to shapes your sexual script. And by the way, and again, I'm speaking very frankly about this because not enough people are. When you are a child or a young person, you are likely to stumble across porn online that is utterly traumatizing to watch in terms of what's going on in it, but at the same time arouses you, because that's what it's designed to do, and we're all sexual beings. That is a very confusing feeling. And you'll be drawn to it because of that. What you are turned on by, what you masturbate to, shapes your sexual script. Make Love Not Porn has the proven ability over the 13 years we've operated as a business to reshape sexual scripts, to arouse people through the power of love, intimacy, and human connection. We are a completely different kind of turn on. And that also is the kind of arousal that is wonderful for anybody who wants to explore their own body and their own pleasure and how they achieve it, but based on what they've seen in porn to date, have no idea there are so many more different approaches out there.
You've spoken about this before, but I just want to ask you again. Do you think society has a perception of what men predominantly want from porn and in the bedroom? Do you think there's a misconception there?
Massively. There is a massive misconception. And I can speak to that because, I designed Make Love Not Porn to be fully diverse and inclusive, and we are. But in the 13 years we've operated, we've discovered that Make Love Not Porn is especially a revelation to boys and men of all ages. We get more grateful emails, appreciative comments from men than anyone else. And by the way, women, everyone loves us as well, but this is especially noteworthy because we are something utterly unique that men will find nowhere else on the internet, which is a safe space where men can be and watch other men being open, emotional, and vulnerable around sex. You would not believe the number of men who write to us regularly and say, I just watched my first video on Make Love Not Porn, and afterwards I cried. I've said for years, I wish society understood the opposite of what it thinks is true. Women enjoy sex just as much as men, and men are just as romantic as women. Yet neither gender is allowed to openly celebrate either of those facts. We'd all be so much better off if they were. I picked up a great Twitter exchange a few years back between two men. The first man had tweeted, as a joke, obviously, hey guys, got this really weird fetish. I've got this kink. Well, I want to watch porn where people are honest, loving, loyal, decent, and really like each other. Hit me up with your hottest links, please. And another man replied and said, there's this website called Make Love Not Porn where you can watch real couples making love. He said, I watched a video where the woman said to her man, I love you, while they're making love. He said, sincerely, I cried when I heard that. And I think a very common misconception is, people go, oh, men want sex, men need sex. Actually, men want love, intimacy, human connection. Men need love, intimacy, human connection. For many men, because of our societal construct of masculinity, where we've stifled this, sex is how they feel that. And they think it's the only conduit. And obviously, if men could open up emotionally more, it is not the only conduit. But that is the misconception. All of us want love, intimacy, and human connection, men as much as anybody else.
Can you tell me about 13 years ago? Take me back 13 years ago when you were setting up this site. Any apprehension there?
Yep. So how it happened was it was completely by accident. I date younger men, so that was how 18, 19 years ago, I realized before anybody else did, through what I was encountering in bed, that when we don't talk openly and honestly about sex, porn becomes sex education by default in not a good way. So I'm a naturally action-oriented person. I went, right, gotta do something about this. So that was when 17 years ago, I put up this tiny clunky website at makelovenotporn.com that in its original version was kind of a public service announcement. Porn world versus real world. Here's what happens in the porn world. Here's what really happens in the real world. I launched at a TED conference in 2009. My TED talk went viral because I was extremely straightforward in it. And the entire world responded. Thousands of people wrote to me from all around the world, including Ireland, pouring their hearts out, telling me things about their sex lives and their porn watching habits. They'd never told anyone before. And I realized I'd uncovered a huge global social issue. And so that was when I felt I had a personal responsibility to take Make Love Not Porn forwards in a way that would make it much more far-reaching, helpful, and effective. And, as I said, the issue is we need to talk more openly and honestly about sex in the real world. I went, okay, how can I build something that will make that happen? So I decided very simply to take every dynamic in social media and apply them to this one area of universal human experience that no other social network platform allows in order to socialize sex. So I decided to build effectively what Facebook would be if it allowed us to openly, healthily, socially, sexually self-express, which it clearly does not. And the interesting thing about that was, so I had this idea, It was enormously challenging to raise funding for, still is. It took me 2 years of pitching it to find one angel investor, put up a small amount of seed funding to build a platform. So I was able to hire a tiny team, build a platform, and then obviously I had to seed the platform with content. So I and my then curator, Sarah, spent a whole year asking our entire networks and complete strangers, will you film yourselves having real world sex for us? So basically, whenever I had a conversation about make love, not porn, I would end it by saying to the person I was talking to, so would you be interested in contributing content? And I would always ask this question, regardless of whether I personally thought they would or wouldn't, which is how I discovered that 99.9% of the time the answer was yes. To the extent that there are occasions when I literally had to force my facial features to stay immobile because I would go, what? You will? And that's how I discovered that the desire to do this lies a lot closer to the surface than many more people than you would ever have thought. And given a reason, given our social mission and our social values, people jump at the chance. And by the way, I designed Make Love Not Porn many years before OnlyFans around a revenue share business model. Our members pay to subscribe and to rent and stream social sex videos. Half that revenue goes to our contributors, our Make Love Not Porn stars. But I can tell you, to this day, there are people who come upon Make Love Not Porn, go, oh my God, this is what the world needs, and will upload videos without even realizing they can get paid for them. That is how much everybody wants to see a more open, healthy dialogue around and attitudes towards sex.
It's incredible what you've done. I mean, I don't know what my answer would have been if you asked me over a Christmas dinner to film myself. But I do want to know, how much has it changed over the years from, 13 years ago, getting those people to film this out? Like if I jumped on your site now, what am I going to see? What am I expecting to find there now?
So one interesting thing is actually we have Make Love Not Porn stars who have been with us since the beginning. And so you can literally follow people through their real lives. We have people who, joined us as partners, got married, wanted children. We have a number of Make Love Not Porn stars on fertility journeys, by the way. So we do recommend our videos as part of that because, just like a year or so after we launched, a couple wrote to us and said, there's a Make Love Not Porn baby. They said, we've been trying for a baby for years. We've just come back from the doctor. They confirmed what we suspected. Our child was conceived the night we watched this particular video on Make Love Not Porn. So we play a role there. People have the babies. Then obviously there's a bit of a hiatus. Then they come back. But I bring that up because our Make Love Not Porn stars tell us that being a part of our community has encouraged them to explore more sexual horizons, brought them closer together. You will see just a wonderful spectrum of people in so many different contexts. And one interesting thing too is, as the only platform that celebrates real world people and their real world sex lives, we also celebrate and showcase how people manage their real world sex lives through real world health conditions. So we have menopausal Make Love Not Porn stars who talk about the impact menopause is having on their sexuality, their partner's sex life, how they're dealing with that. We have Make Love Not Porn stars with vaginismus, much more common amongst women than people realize, talking in their videos, demonstrating what they are doing to be able to have a pleasurable sex life through that. We have older Make Love Not Porn stars. We have people with chronic health conditions, cancer survivors. And so this is inspiration education for everybody. And one of the things I love is that we hear regularly from couples who write literally, you saved my marriage, you saved my relationship. And the important thing there is, we had an email from a woman last year who went, oh my God, the best $10 a month I've ever spent. And that's what our subscriptions start at. She said, my husband and I have been married for 20 years and sex had dwindled to a few times a year. She said, then we discovered your amazing platform. We've had sex 8 times in the first month. But the important thing about her email was, she said, it's not just the sex. She said, we are now feeling closer, more connected, more intimate, and more in love than at any point before in our marriage. They've been married 20 years. And
That's
so
amazing.
we have revived love and intimacy for them in a really powerful way. So we're not just about what you see, we are about how transformative that is for your own sexual attitudes and behavior.
And lastly, Cindy, for those who are so riddled with shame and embarrassment but want to feel pleasure and desire again, what would your advice be for them?
So one thing I do want to bring up specifically for Ireland is um, we have just launched under the radar, because we haven't launched officially, but we've just taken live um, something I've had in the pipeline for 10 years, because parents and teachers began begging for this from the first day of Make Love Not Porn. We've just taken live makelovenotporn.academy. So if our listeners go to that URL, you will see that this is what I was asked for, which is the 0 to 18 and beyond lifetime sex education platform. So Make Love Not Porn Academy is a global aggregator hub for the best of the world's sex education content that is already out there, but has been blocked, censored, and deplatformed everywhere. And I bring that up because one of our educators on Make Love Not Porn Academy, and by the way, listeners, when you go to makelovenotporn.academy, be forgiving, it's very early stage beta. We literally have just taken it live. We're still loading educators and content onto the platform. We'll launch officially when we have a critical mass. But one of our educators is a wonderful website called catholicintimacy.com. And I came across Catholic Intimacy, which was run by the wonderful James Watley and his wife. He's a Catholic pastor here in the US. But he and his wife are therapists. And they basically help with therapy, and they educate on intimacy for people who obviously are Catholic and who want to know within those religious parameters what they are able to do and enjoy. And I highlight this because I designed Make Love Not Porn Academy to cover a total spectrum of cultural sensibility, age appropriateness, personal relevance. And I want to say to the people of Ireland, I want you to make Irish love, not porn. I would love you to come to Make Love Not Porn. See how wonderful sex is when it is free of guilt, shame, and embarrassment. Be inspired by the love in action you see there. But also go to makelovenotporn.academy and search Catholic Intimacy there. Also go to catholicintimacy.com, because there are wonderful people out there beyond me who are there to help you absolutely enjoy the pleasure you deserve, to find the deeper connection and sexual intimacy you deserve, and have that be completely consonant with your faith and your beliefs and your values.
You're very busy. You're
I am. Yeah, yeah.
Holy moly.
And actually, on that front, if you don't mind, I do just want to make a plea to Ireland as well. I struggle to find investors and philanthropists. I mention investors because we need funding. I mention philanthropists because we have a non-profit vehicle. We can take donations, we can take philanthropic capital, donor advised funds, foundation grants. And we really, really need help and support. The conventional tech world won't fund us because we are to do with sex. But, I know everybody listening in Ireland knows exactly why the work we do at Make Love Not Porn and the Academy is so badly needed. And so if out there in the world are Irish investors and philanthropists, I would like nothing better than to have you hit me up, because I would love Ireland to be a source of funding and support, because I know that we can transform Irish culture around sex for the better.
Absolutely. Well said. And if you're out there, do get in touch with Cindy, because wouldn't it be great, with our reputation, that we are forward thinking in, sex education for a change. Cindy, thank you so much for being with us today. And I really appreciate everything that you're doing in sex education. So thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity to have a very free and frank conversation like this one.
One more question. Sorry. Yeah, what is that? Oh, young women. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Just one more question going back to mainstream porn. Uh, Cindy, just talking about mainstream porn, what effect, we know the effects it has on young males, but what about young women?
I have an art project that I've always wanted to do, which I need funding for because I would have to pay a photographer and models. But I want one day when I can do it to take the homepage of Pornhub, YouPorn, one of the big tube sites, and to replicate it by reshooting every video thumbnail with the genders flipped. And I think our listeners know exactly what I mean by that. That would demonstrate how ridiculous the male lens on porn is. And so I think it's very important to understand that, and I'm going to speak very, very frankly here. And by the way, you can edit this out if you need to. Um, I see this in the younger men I date myself. I'm very selective about whom I date. First and foremost, they have to be a very nice person. I've read off very nice people. I date lovely younger men in an atmosphere of mutual trust, respect, affection, liking. And yet, when we get into bed, I see them modeling the kind of body language that says, my dick is the center of the universe, because that's the male lens on porn that they've grown up internalizing. And so it's very important for young women to understand that they are entitled to their own pleasure and they're entitled to make sure that they get it. I was very moved by, a young woman left a comment on a video, Make Love Not Porn, saying, after watching this video, I felt so enabled and empowered in my own sexual agency. Thank you for this gift. And that is just a demonstration of how rarely young women get to see sex, lovemaking in action, as they will on Make Love Not Porn, which is all about equality of pleasure. At Make Love Not Porn, we are all about orgasm equality. 1-1, 2-2. In fact, ideally, even more for the woman than for the man in straight couples. And so it's just so important that young women understand that they are sexual beings in their own right. And actually, a really great sexual relationship and loving partnership is when you both get to have an equally good time in bed. I'm a great believer in radical simplicity. I like to keep things very simple. The single biggest turn on in the world is to be in bed with somebody and know they're having an amazing time because of you. Not enough people understand that. Many young men in a straight context absolutely need to understand that. And young women need to know that the best sex comes when everybody is having an equally good time and everyone is having an equal number of orgasms.
Well said.